We mandate that the truth be told. Today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
Amen to the truth, or at least as best we know it. Joining me for the remainder of this hour is one of my favorite guests, Matthew Ehret. He's a journalist, a lecturer, a founder of the Canadian Patriot Review. He is a director at Rising Tide Foundation, a senior fellow at the American University in Moscow. And he's written this really interesting article, which I love talking about these subjects, and not for the obvious reasons, but more for the reasons that we're about to get into. He had an article that came out on the 27th, when I was September 27th. I was still overseas getting ready to fly back, so I couldn't cover it then, but I took note of it and wanted to return to it when I had a chance. This article on the CanadianPatriot.org has the title, "What Do UFOs, Lawrence Rockefeller, and MK Ultra Have in Common? More Than You Think." Matt, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm just trying to get a little spot in my house that has a better connection, because I know we were getting a little bit choppy. Hopefully the sound remains reliable.
Well, you're sounding pretty good to me right now.
Glad to be back.
Well, and I'm glad to have you, and I enjoy the things that you have to say. And you know what? In full disclosure to everybody, no pun intended. Yes, I've spent part of the reason I'm on the radio today is initially because of my interest in the UFO subject. As a kid, I was immediately drawn to it. I grew up on a farm, and I was in the flight path of Dyess Air Force Base in Abilene, Texas, and the B-52s would fly over, and the moon launches were happening. I mean, I'm pushing 60. I'm old. And these things inspired me. And then I started reading science fiction as a kid. And so I have long been a follower of the UFO, ET, UAP hypothesis. That being said, I've seen it all. I've heard it all. And I'm not as active in that realm anymore because I've learned a lot of things. But let's talk about this. Matt, what you're putting forth in this article is that, you know what? Hate to break it to you guys, there are people that are invested in the idea of occasionally leading us astray. And one of those things may be the UFO ET hypothesis.
Well, you know, for me, I spent years as well very passionate about this topic. I was going back in my old portfolio of paintings, and I had an early painting that I did of, Michelangelo's David, and instead of God's finger, it was an alien finger. And I went through the Sitchin material, Zachariah Sitchin, and all this stuff for many years. And, at a certain point, I found myself having to confront the fact that I personally had skipped a few steps. In terms of my research, I was trying to come up with an explanation of the grand history based on aliens and all these things. But I hadn't done the time to really evaluate what were the oligarchical structures of social engineering, thought control, manipulation of even my own mini history of the 20th century. I just didn't do the work. And so only when that was brought to my attention that I started shifting gears and focusing on things like what was MK Ultra, that I started realizing that there's a lot of overlap between a lot of the figures from the CIA, MI6 that played a key role in putting online MK Ultra as a new form of psychological warfare. And these same individuals also were big leading figures in the rise of the UFO flying saucer disclosure operations of the 1940s even, and 50s inside both the USA and Britain, which, created some anomalies in my mind, to say the least. And that's the source of this article. Yeah. Well,
some people might say, okay, Mike, Matt, okay, we get it, but why would the government want I say this rhetorically because right now I think the question is, why would they do it and how far would they go? So why would oligarchs, governments want to put ideas as fantastic as this in our mind? You know what, you guys, I'm asking a long question. I just looked at the clock. We're going to go ahead and take our bottom of the hour news break so that we can get into this in the detail that it deserves. I'm here with Matthew Ehret. We're going to be right back.
This is James O'Neill with a check of today's headlines. The alleged use by Russia of Iranian-made drones in recent attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure has drawn condemnation from Kyiv and its allies, along with threats of Western retaliation and sanctions. The UK's inflation rate has risen back to the record high of 10.1%, driven by soaring food prices. 3 weeks after Hurricane Ian struck Florida, the bridge to hard-hit Sanibel Island is open again.
Why not give TNT Radio a follow? We're on all major social platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Gab, and Getter. Help us get the word out as we cover the biggest topics of our time right here on today's News Talk. TNT Radio. TNT Radio.
Matthew Ehret is my guest this hour, and you can find his work at CanadianPatriot.org. Just to recap, the question that I'm posing to Matt is, people might say, okay, all right, well, why would a government or the elite or oligarchs, all these people, why would they want us to entertain such fantastic ideas as the existence of extraterrestrial life or to indulge in psychedelics?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that for the first part of the question, I think one has to appreciate the grand strategizing role and importance of a figure named H.G. Wells throughout the entire 20th century. That's key. And people often think of the man as being just a benign science fiction writer, but no, not at all. He was a high-level Fabian Society operative, a leading student of Thomas Huxley, Darwin's controller and handler of the 19th century. And he innovated a technique of predictive programming, utilizing the warfare of the mind and specifically of the imagination of the people to shape the zeitgeist more broadly using the veneer of stories and myths. He went to war in the 1890s with a much better storyteller who was a much more noble character named Jules Verne, who was the true pioneer of science fiction. But the difference between the two men was that Verne wanted to liberate and inspire human beings to the power of the creative mind and science and discoveries to overcome limits that we impose on ourselves. Whereas H.G. Wells, being it that he worked for an actual oligarchical demonic force, I guess, for lack of a better word, devoted his purpose and his creativity to the idea of enslaving humankind to the limits that would be imposed on us using stories, again, like the Time Machine. The War of the Worlds was a big one. And his work was applied and again, people have to read his New World Order or his Open Conspiracy if they want to get a sense of the real H.G. Wells as grand strategist, or his World Brain, for example, as nonfiction. So the War of the World was used as the basis of a social engineering experiment in 1938. I want to say, maybe it was 39. And people know the famous story of Orson Welles, who was assigned to tell the story as if it was a real news blip on the radio, and it caused mass riots. Some people were stomped to death. Some people thought it was Nazis invading. Some people really thought it was aliens because it was difficult to see. But they did see that psychologically it was a very interesting test case to see how easy people would turn into a mob of fear that would be easily misdirected towards the cause of their problems. And so that was one of the lessons that was employed. And it was originally there was a meeting in Montreal at the Carlton Hotel, and Sir Henry Tizard, leading figures of the CIA, played a role at this meeting. And I get at this in that article, which set the stage for MK Ultra as a technique of mind manipulation, deconstruction, and figuring out ways of disassociating humankind from the continuity of their history, their deeper religious traditions, other forms of moral traditions, which the oligarchy desperately wanted to destroy to reconstruct humankind from a blank slate, kind of. So the idea of Henry Tizard, who was a leading figure in the British Air Force in radar, was not just setting up MK Ultra, but he was also the first person to set up the UFO flying saucer working party in Britain. He was working closely with people like Joseph Bryan, a leading CIA operative from the Psychological Warfare Division branch, who I get at, from the OPC, it's part of the CIA, the worst elements of the CIA of the Dulles operation that really worked on psychological warfare. But Bryan III, Joseph Bryan III, who was a leading Grandmaster Freemason in Maryland, he was also the guy who spearheaded the 1950s and 60s flying saucer cults. He ran the biggest, most influential flying saucer research magazines. And he was like heading these boards for about 15, 20 years. No, I think it was about 20 years. So, you have all of these weird figures, and it's like, are they honest in one world and dishonest in the other world? Or are these two sides of the same thing? Unfortunately, my assessment, two sides of the exact same thing, which we really saw coming online with Lawrence Rockefeller and what he was assigned to do as part of the Rockefeller operation in the 1970s, 80s, and especially into the 90s when he created the Disclosure Project and bankrolled it. including this figure, Stephen Greer, who was his entire meal ticket was bought and paid for by Lawrence Rockefeller to try to unify all of the disparate UFO organizations that had been built up over the Cold War.
And it's funny because coming up through all of this UFO stuff and hosting a lot of UFO related content, meeting a lot of these people, Stephen Greer, I never interviewed. I was always a bit leery of him, but I have interviewed Martin Keller, who worked for him for a number of years, and we've talked about Greer. The weird thing about the whole UFO thing to me is that it was always out there, and it was always an interesting subject to some people. And then in the late 90s, with the rise of the internet, people like me could suddenly, if we had a half decent internet connection, now we can find other people who are interested in UFOs. And then it took off from there. And I would consider that almost the golden, that through like the first years of 2000, first few years of the 2000 as being like the kind of the UFO golden age. And now I see it's kind of not as popular as it was. And I see a great deal of infighting. And like yourself, I looked into David Icke at one point. I read the Sitchin stuff. I got into all of these things. And I'm not saying that I know for 100% that this stuff isn't true, but it didn't resonate with me in the long run. And I think now the UFO interest has turned into something else, which is kind of this, and I do want to return to Lawrence Rockefeller. I'm rambling a little bit, but now it's more of this kind of post-UAP where we've renamed it and we're looking at Tic Tacs and gimbals and things like this. But Lawrence Rockefeller, interesting dude, back in the late 90s, when I would read about this guy, I'm like, well, wait a minute. If this man is this old and he's this rich and he's interested in this subject, well, that actually kind of gives credence to me. So let's talk about him for a minute.
Yeah, well, the whole Rockefeller clan were carrying on a certain tradition that I think your viewers are probably pretty well aware of, that goes back many generations. Nelson had his assignment to play. He almost became president of the United States, right? When Gerald Ford was nearly assassinated by a Charles Manson family member in the 70s.
Squeaky Fromm?
But Nelson, pardon me?
That was Squeaky Fromm, I think, right?
I think so, yeah. That was
okay. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
But so yeah, Nelson, David, William or Stephen, who also was a co-founder of the Earth Charter, along with Maurice Strong. They all had sort of different assignments, but Lawrence Rockefeller, he was a big bankroller of the psychedelic movement of people like Terence McKenna, who he paid for to, voyage around the world collecting the best psychedelics that you could come up with and come up with a scientific unified index of all of the best psychedelics, their effects. Again, very, very much part of the outgrowth of the sort of things you saw with MK Ultra and experimentation. He also was a big bankroller of the Esalen Institute's Barbara Marx Hubbard. And she even thanked Lawrence Rockefeller for bankrolling her a few of her books and a lot of her research projects. But the human potential movement is what she and the Esalen Institute put online. A lot of the neurolinguistic programming movement that came out of the hypnotic studies that people like Aldous Huxley were working on and pioneering, Bander and this whole grouping, were all receiving funds and support. And Lawrence Rockefeller was the biggest funder of the human potential movement. So all of these things, you're like, okay, is he really just this passionate person about human potential and UFO disclosure and psychedelics and opening up your mind? Or again, is it all part of social engineering to create a lobotomized global population that would be much more manageable to an oligarchical class in, let's say, a post-Great Reset age? Yeah, in my view, it's the second thing. And Lawrence Rockefeller, I mean, there's pictures of him that I get at from the, having Hillary Clinton and Bill at his ranch. He had John Podesta on as an early devotee for pushing disclosure. Bill Clinton started passing laws disclosing, making public Area 51 material, which is, when you read through a lot of these millions of documents, everyone who looks at them basically says, well, it's a lot of just anonymous anecdotal data that just, who knows what the people are seeing? Are they looking at classified aerospace objects that are classified because it's the Cold War and they don't know what they're looking at, including astronauts or even Air Force officials who are flying their jets? They look out the window, they see something crazy. They don't have the security clearance to know what it is. So they just come down from their flight experience and they're like, yeah, I guess I saw a UFO. That's, So you have all of these things that are being disclosed, and people like Hillary are pushing for this. Podesta is the biggest advocate for 20 plus years. And then they set up something called there's a front man named
Tom DeLonge,
the lead singer for Blink.
Tom DeLonge.
Yeah, Tom DeLonge, that's him. Blink 182 lead singer, big UFO fan, and he is, a cardboard cutout, dumb kid, just led to believe that he's brilliant. He's been selected by the CIA, by Lockheed Martin officials to get on the inside track and help train humanity to understand why UFOs are real. They've been watching over us, and so his To the Stars Academy has been backing a lot of cultural operations to, again, prepare us for the great revelation that's soon to come of the oncoming UFO reality. And I think with holographic technology, things like that, it looks like to me like they're trying to create a new grand narrative, a new replacement religion for the old religions that would be much more in conformity with, again, the oligarchy. And that's the Davos, like Klaus Schwab even announced last year with Linda Rothschild, the Great Narrative Project, to create the new stories for the next millennia in their mind, because they don't think of this as a momentary thing. So yeah, what are they going to bring online? I don't know, but probably something, that a traumatized population that had suffered from some economic despair would be more than willing to accept, because people would be more inclined to look for hope out of the despair when they've been shock therapied. But
let me throw something in. One thing that I noticed interesting just in the last several days, and I was never a fan of the music, but Tom DeLonge has rejoined Blink 182, and they are going to go on tour. Make of that what you will. Make of that what you will. I mean, I think he's probably like, what, maybe this boat has sailed, and maybe I need to go back to my bread and butter and play music. Now, I will say this about Tom. An old friend of mine signed them originally to their publishing deal. He was, like us, he was legitimately interested in the UFO subject as a kid, and he did fanzines and the whole thing. But yeah, it began to get quite suspicious when you're telling me that Tom DeLonge of Blink 182 that has all these songs about, I don't even want to go into it, is now being catered to and spoken to by members of the intel community. It didn't really ring true for me, but I was like, you know what? I'm going to stay out of this, because maybe it is what he's claiming it is, and To the Skies or To the Stars, whatever it was, never seemed to me to really fully get off the ground, but it did have a lot of really big names assigned to it. And back to Lawrence Rockefeller, what's interesting to me about Lawrence Rockefeller and Podesta and the Clintons is I think that sometimes two things can be true at once. Absolutely, these people would be glad to deceive us into anything to get us to comply. But Lawrence Rockefeller reminds me, and Podesta as well, there was a movie that came out, I think 2012, 2015, and I'm trying to find it here in my notes. It was Prometheus. It was going to be the fifth movie in the Alien series. And this particular one, there was a character in it. And of course, here we go. Peyton Whalen. Peyton Whalen is this old man, has a corporation, basically wants to live forever. So he wants to go search for the aliens who he thinks are the engineers of the human race so that he could then get the secrets from them to make himself live longer. And the reason that I bring this up is like, these are pretty, in my opinion, these are dark people and they have imaginations, and whether it be demons, whether it be aliens, whatever, I guarantee you, if they thought that they could get some information that would further their power, they'd probably be into it. On the other hand, they are more than happy to lead us down the garden path.
Yeah, good point. No, these guys are ultimately really obsessed with immortality and escaping the ultimate, part of the human experience, which is death. These are ultimately an organizational force, which is extremely hedonistic. I mean, you unfortunately, when you start scratching the surface to some of their inner fetishes, it gets sick and perverted to the extreme. Yeah, and this is something that goes back centuries, if not millennia, as far as what is needed to maintain the continuity of oligarchical class structures and systems of master-slave societies. Is you have to both bestialize your victims to make your victims not realize the divinity that they all have, because they are expected to believe that they're just like talking cows that can only adapt to controlled environments that the feudal lords control. But then the actual feudal lords and their auxiliaries also have to have a very bestialized cultural matrix that processes their identities as well, so that they willingly are able to cut themselves off of their own conscience and become the willful conduits of a very evil agency, which is very unnatural. It's hard to get human beings to do that. You know, it takes a lot of time to craft that. So I think you're right. When you look at like the obsession to get the Philosopher's Stone, to get the, you know, to do a bargain with like the whole Dr. Faustus idea from Marlowe, selling your soul to the devil in order to have magical powers and cheat death. All of these things have been really an obsessive thing that the oligarchy has been thinking about. And I think today with the transhumanist ideology, it's very similar, but with a scientific veneer that they can upload their brains onto clouds and avoid death that way. But it's really just mysticism in an occult way, and very much not founded on any reality. They are delusional, and dangerously so. But yeah, I think the idea with Prometheus, that movie, I didn't think of it that way, but it's true. Yeah, it's very
well.
insightful.
One other thing you said, either in the article or one of the interviews that I listened to, you basically said that another thing, because we're coming up on a break, but I want to make this point because I thought it was great. Mm-hmm. Another thing about the whole alien ET UFO thing is it gets interesting out of the box thinkers to whittle their time away on something that may or may not ever come to fruition, and keep them from actually doing something about their reality. I speak with Matt Ehret. We're going to take a break. This is TNT Deprogrammed. We'll be right back.
De-weaponizing weather with reality and perspective.
The global ACE index, this is accumulated cyclonic energy from tropical cyclones, looks to be at record low levels. In addition, the 3-year period, and we're talking globally, looks like it's going to be the lowest 3-year period we've had on record. And that includes when the Earth was a heck of a lot colder back in the 1980s. Now we had the time from 1991 to 2000 where there was an increase, fell back down, briefly came up 2004, 2005, but since about 2006, most of the time it has run well below the 30-year average. And it's in the tank now. Not only that, but listen to this. The ACE per storm is lower. In other words, the storms are actually weaker than they were. Fewer storms, and they're weaker overall. That's exactly opposite of what you're hearing now, isn't it? This is weatherbell.com meteorologist Joe Bastardi for TNT Radio, asking you to enjoy the weather. It's the only weather you got.
I came to clean and noticed there was no food in the house.
She told me her sister just forgot to pay a few bills.
He was in for his monthly trim when I noticed the bruising.
Is there anything I can do?
Thousands of older Australians experience elder abuse every year. If you're concerned about someone you know, you don't need to have all the answers. Call 1-800-ELDER-HELP for free confidential information and support.
It's never a burden to fight for what's right. Lighting the fuse for freedom. Today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
Matthew Ehret is my guest. We're going to continue our discussion of UFOs and MK Ultra and the psychedelics and the intersection between the two. Matt, it has also not been unnoticed by me, kind of the resurgence of interest in the psychedelic movement with guys like Joe Rogan. And now, you know, there's a few little kind of stocks that you can buy that, and listen, I by and large, I am not anti-psychedelic. I actually have used psychedelics. I've used them a long time and will do so again. But just yesterday, per your suggestion, I had on Dave Gosselin, and we were talking about some of the use in the psychedelics, tune in, tune out. And that's another way of disabling people from being active in their world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing too. Like, a lot of these things are not in and of themselves bad. You know, I mean, I could see and appreciate good virtuous things that you could glean from psychedelics under an honest framework of actual honesty and goodness. You know, however, the problem is the reality of these very real top-down intentions that are using these instruments in particularly politically charged ways to get effects. which you just alluded to. And part of the strategy, especially since the 1960s, was the idea of getting individuals to atomize themselves and cut themselves off of the continuum of civilization that they were parts of, which animates us to become more than we are, to become better people, is appreciating the sacrifices of the past, making sacrifices ourselves for the future, living for something on higher than ourselves. And so that was really targeted by those who created things like UNESCO, the World Health Organization, Brock Chisholm, who says directly his views in 1946, which very much echoed Julian Huxley's same remarks, that all of the ills of society, the wars and the mental dysfunctions, all come from the belief in family, religion, and nation. That we have to, if we can break these things, we can purify and heal humanity from all of their mental neuroses that have held them at bay for thousands of years. So coming out of things like MK Ultra, the Tavistock research that fed into that earlier was that, you can help compartmentalize people, get them to turn inward, explore their inner reality, and break off from an idea of objective truth. Because the idea of, well, everybody has their own truth, you have your truth. You believe that there's like 80 plus 2 genders. And this person believes there's 41.2 genders. This person believes in only 2 genders. Well, let's all just either agree to disagree or destroy the person who is trying to upset the boat and say that there is a truth. And that's sort of like one of the aspects of this ultra liberalism, which actually just is a hardcore totalitarian fascism masquerading with liberalism as a soft veneer, saying we'll agree with everybody who thinks that there is no truth. But as soon as somebody enters the playing field who asserts that there is a truth, well, that upsets the game. And they have to thus be sacrificed or destroyed or mocked or whatever. So the role of psychedelics became part of a useful array of tools to get people to, again, just, they're looking at the Vietnam War, they're looking at the assassinations of their great heroes, Martin Luther King, and they're feeling very nihilistic, demoralized, a lot of despair. And within that despair is a great fertile soil for escapism. And the drug culture became embraced by a lot of those young people who were witnessing insanity in the world that they were living in. They didn't understand what was taking over their governments. And so they jumped right into the trap and created, now this is 3-4 generations into this process of normalizing something which, they should have been trying to pick up the torch of Martin Luther King, not doing the opposite. And so now everything's being legalized, like in BC, we got every single drug being legalized across the board, and that's not working. It's not like violence is going down or suicide is going down. All of those things are going up. It's just that people are a little bit more passive now, a little bit more willing to just wait until they get their suicide pill from the new euthanasia policies that are also coming online by the same agencies.
And I was not aware that some of these people that were involved in NICAP and all of these things back in the day into UFO research were also involved in MK Ultra. And the reason that I'm bringing all of this to the fore is not so much about UFOs and psychedelics as much as it's just the question you have to ask yourself. And this is to my audience. It's like, how far would they go? How far would these people go to change your mind about something? And I bring this up right now in the context of what we are being told to believe about the vaccines or about the war in Ukraine. How far would they go? I would say they would go pretty damn far. And it might sound outlandish to you, but right now the CDC is considering making these COVID vaccines mandatory for school children. Well, most people that have been paying attention even remotely know that there's some issues with this. So I'm just saying they do have an agenda. They do seek to shape your opinions on things. They will use fear, or they will use many different agendas and methods in order to shape your opinions and how you're going to eventually behave.
Yeah, right. No, that's a great point. And yeah, these guys are, there doesn't seem to be much of a red line in terms of like stopping them from going a certain distance. They want to go all the way. Like they really do idealize feudalism in its worst incarnation. They want that back again in their idea, that's a world where people learn to just be happy existing in the moment without questioning anything outside of the electric fence that's placed in their minds. So they're just happy being. And just like the human talking cows in feudal days, that would just know there's certain, you can't kill that deer, you can't kill that rabbit or else, those are the lords who runs the estate. That's their rabbits. You can't go past this road because you're part of the estate, and the objects on the estate can't pass this road. That's sort of the type of idea they want to get by getting people into a state where they no longer believe in driving cars or flying planes or anything. Maybe you can get on a local bike that you rent. But the idea of traveling, seeing the world, expanding your identity beyond your little mini local community, that's all verboten in their fictitious world that they want to bring into being. And, you have the limits being pushed, and I alluded to euthanasia. That's another one that dovetails the COVID thing, because they're different aspects of the same population control mechanism. And in Canada, we have now the announcement that was just made this week that come March of next year, mature minors will be granted the rights to access full euthanasia, tax-funded euthanasia policies in Canada. And they don't define what, first of all, mature minors even means. Is that like a demoralized or
isn't that an oxymoron?
12-year-old?
Isn't that an oxymoron, a mature minor?
Maybe. Is it like a kid who smokes, like they're 12 and smoke? So yeah, sure. I don't know.
A tattoo.
But how many kids are going through hormone issues and just want to end it, So that's now being extended, and we could see no end to this. Obviously, the whole thing is we are normally problem solvers. We normally we see a problem, we want to solve it, and that's beautiful. That's what makes humans great. We see a limit to our growth potential. We will go and creatively try to solve that limit, because our choice when you have a limit is either kill people and accommodate the limit, or encourage discoveries, overcome the limit to growth, and then all of a sudden make abundance. Much better, much more human option there, that second one. So they want to try to cripple our ability to do that. And there's, on top of the drug culture of escapism, they're like Yuval Harari says, what's the solution for managing the useless eaters? He came out and said that this is the darling of Davos, drugs and video games, to manage the useless eaters. And he's a direct disciple of H.G. Wells. He even said H.G. Wells, reading his history of the world, gave him his inspiration to become a philosopher and gave him meaning to his life as a young idiot nihilist, who just felt alienated. So this is sort of what they're, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, we started out talking about the whole UFO thing and psychedelics and shaping people's reality, or shaping their interest to keep them out of trying to solve real problems. And I read this past week, and maybe you've heard of it because you brought up eugenics and suicide assistance. There is currently, from what I understand, some kind of a product that you can purchase on Amazon that comes with a book, and it's a particular compound that essentially can be used as a suicide kit. Have you heard about this?
That's messed up, and no, I didn't hear about it, though I'm not surprised. No,
and it is a particular compound
so soon.
It is a particular compound, and right now the lawyers for Amazon are apparently pushing back against the parent groups because kids have bought this thing. It comes in a typical Amazon box. And I mean, it's just, I read this just a few days ago, and I intend to do a piece on it, but it's just this idea of let's get everybody to be completely compliant, stay in their homes, play video games, be doped up, eventually kill yourself. We're better than this.
Yeah. And you know what? Then that also partially solves the food crisis in some of their minds too, because you could take that body is now meat, right? And you could process that either for fertilizer, for feeding your kids. I don't know. Like, I mean, you see this how this is a really perverse set of ideas that are employed right now that are trying to make Soylent Green reality. The whole like Charlton Heston crazy movie from 72. The overarching thing though, again, is like, one of the things I tend to get when I read, like even Prince Philip was a big UFO patron, supporter for many, many years. And one thing that you get when you listen to Prince Philip's reasons why he supports this, or even like the head of Falun Gong, the Li Hongji, who's the head of Falun Gong that runs Epoch Times, he also believes that he is an intermediary for alien forces who have taken over control. Oh, yeah. There's a Time magazine interview from 1999 you can read online with Li Hongji. And he lives in a 400-acre compound in New York protected by the CIA. Keep that in mind, too. But he goes through in depth his belief that human beings became corrupted because aliens possessed us from other dimensions and other planetary bodies and made us believe in scientific and technological progress, which made us corrupt and disassociated us from the natural harmony of human beings with the jungle. That's his philosophical sort of view, which also you see in the Prometheus movie. You got that as a slight underpinning too, that great discoveries, the Promethean discoveries that allowed, human beings. The story was Prometheus stole fire from Zeus and disobeyed Zeus's law that man should remain ignorant, and gave man access to fire and math and knowledge and astronomy. That's the beautiful idea of Prometheus. And he was tortured by Zeus for that crime of teaching man how to think. And they've taken that and they've said, no, actually scientific and technological discoveries were actually nothing special. It's just, us human beings reverse engineering alien technology, or that aliens just gave it to us the whole time. There's nothing all that divine or special about humans, because we just have aliens helping us the whole time, or enslaving us, or a mix of both. So it really destroys that more noble idea of human beings,
I'm just smiling because one time back in the day, we're almost up at the end of the hour, but I was doing a Roswell particular interview with a person I do like and whose work I found provoking at the time. But his idea was that basically the Roswell crash was an intentional crash. It was an intel operation. Who knows, man? Matt, I always enjoy our conversations. Ladies and gentlemen, go to CanadianPatriot.org. All we're telling you to do is think outside the box. Don't let them take that from you.
Amen.
All right, Matt, thank you so much for coming on. You will be back soon. Ladies and gentlemen, we got to take a break. We'll be back.